split Serengeti as an exclusionary area. You can't live in there. No one can live in there. Ngorongoro Conservation Area, the area which is still part of the Serengeti ecosystem, as well as this giant collapsed volcano. This is part of a different type of management area. And in the NCA, so when we talk about the NCA, I'm talking about Ngorongoro Conservation Area, but that's a mouthful. So in the NCA, Maasai were allowed to live and graze cattle. You could have schools, medical clinics, but again, the footprint was relatively light. And it's a we call it a multiple use area. It can be used for, wildlife conservation, tourism, but also for pastoralists living in the area. And throughout this period of time, there were foreigners, like foreign organizations, the Frankfurt Zoological Society, a couple of famous wildlife filmmakers and conservationists, wildlife behavioralists, like ethologists who are studying wildlife behavior, who were living in a lot of these areas and contributing to the knowledge about what's special and unique about different areas and where parks should be gazetted. In 1982, so we're a long way down the road. Tanganyika has become Tanzania. It's gone through the period of socialism. It's starting to liberalize. They realized through studying that, and we'll talk about Serengeti in much more depth later, but in 82 they discovered that the way that they had gazetted the park, and this is a really common problem in areas that ecosystems that experience strong seasonality, that they had only actually protected some of the ecosystem, right? That the migration actually, dry season habitat is smaller. When it rains and the grass gets greener, wildlife spreads out. So for trying to protect the wet season habitat, particularly for the long-term health of an ecosystem, is actually really important. They realized in 82 that they hadn't actually protected the entire ecosystem, that there were sections that they'd missed out on. And so there was work to try and create different types of other protected areas around the perimeter of the Serengeti ecosystem with different levels of protection to really make the sustainability of that ecosystem as it was to continue. Okay. Brief history of Serengeti. Let's talk about different types of protected areas in Tanzania, because you're going to hear us throwing these terms around and it'll be helpful for you. So let's start from the least protected, as far as allowing the most types of use in an area, to the most exclusionary, to the fewest types of use. So we'll start with game reserve. A game reserve is a category of wildlife protected area where both consumptive and non-consumptive utilization of wildlife is allowed. So that means that, consumptive being hunting and non-consumptive being phototourism. You can do both of those things in game reserves. Also, people are allowed to live in game reserves. So in a lot of cases in Tanzania, game reserves encompass parts of village land. So it's not a separate type, it's a different layer that goes on top of the traditional village land borders. You also have forest reserves, which is similar to a game reserve, but it's designed, rather than focused on the game, it's more focused on the trees and the just general biomass of an area. So you have, in Tanzania, an area that has vast highlands that receive lots of rain and lowlands that receive less rain. Your forests are sort of your bank for water, right? They call them catchment areas because forests catch moisture and pull it out of the air, even if it's not raining, right? As clouds move through trees, they pull moisture out of the air through condensation on the leaves. That gets transferred into the ground. becomes groundwater and runs off. So as you cut forests, you are essentially dramatically decreasing your water supply. So forest reserves were designed as a way to protect forests. There are also multiple use areas. Like people can live in and around forest reserves. They can do non-consumptive utilization. So there are groups of people that have honeybees and have hives, so you're allowed to keep bees. And actually, in Tanzania, the Department of Forestry is called the Department of Forestry and Beekeeping because it's like such a long historical old way of making a living here. Okay. Then you have game-controlled areas. A game-controlled area is an area where it's outside village land, where any activities that are detrimental to wildlife are prohibited. These tend to be trophy hunting blocks. And also notice that when we say activities detrimental to wildlife, that's like a pretty nebulous term. It's not defined very clearly, so it leads to a lot of infighting over exactly what that means. Yes.
Would you say that's more like population as a whole or individuals in this area? So like trophy hunting, like you're going to take out like one specific animal, so that's not detrimental to the entire population, but it's detrimental to that animal.
Right. But also, so all in the game controlled areas, there are quotas that are established for each of the game controlled areas that are historically done based on census data. So the idea is that even if you're doing like lion trophy hunting in an area, you're only allowed to take a certain number of animals out of a particular ecosystem. And depending on, like, there are some game controlled areas where the fee to lease it as a hunting company is much higher because it has many, like, the quotas are higher in those areas, right? This is a whole other digression, but note with hunting, like those quotas that are established, that's a great system as long as you can keep on top of that data and control that the data is accurate. And trying to manage that data over a long period of time, especially when you have hunting blocks, like game controlled areas that are maybe allocated to one hunting company for 20 years, trying to keep that data accurate can be a really difficult and challenging task. But yeah, also, I mean, I mentioned lion hunt. There's also like different hunting practices vary depending on